Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Mike Okwoche. The rules of engagement and the art of warfare in Africa took a different dimension last September when the deadly Somali-based Al-Shabaab attacked the Westgate Mall in Nairobi, Kenya, killing 67 people. Now, for nearly a decade, the United States have tried to subdue the terrorist group using everything from African allies to missile strikes and to commando raids. Now, a recent airstrike by U.S. forces killed 6 militants, with the fate of the group's leader, Ahmed Abdi Godane, largely uncertain. Now, we ask, what are your thoughts on collaborative efforts to fight terrorism and tackle extremist groups in Africa? You can share with us on Twitter at TVC Africa Today or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. We'll take a report now, and Africa Today will continue. Thanks for joining us.
The Somali National Army and the African Union Mission in Somalia, AMISOM, have liberated the town of Kutumwari in Lower Shabelle, Somalia, from Al-Shabaab militants. This comes after the forces had liberated Bulumara and the 2 small towns in the same region as the advance to Barawi continues. The joint operation by the Somali National Army and the African Union Mission in Somalia is part of a wider campaign to liberate Somalia and its people. The liberation of this town, located in the southeastern region of the country, was particularly smooth, with no resistance whatsoever from the notoriously armed Al-Shabaab militants. The troops recovered knives and guns abandoned by the militants. Speaking after the capture, the AMISOM Uganda contingent commander explained how the operation was conducted.
AMISOM in particular employs a very powerful special force from Uganda, and this special force comes in with a lot of clinical results. There is nowhere we need to fire. We cannot fight if there is no resistance. So we entered Kutunure without a single bullet that has been shot. Reason, we don't have to fire if we have not been fired at.
The brigadier, who was appointed in 2013, said further that the troops and the leadership of the area have engaged with residents, encouraging them to support the federal government of Somalia in their efforts to improve their communities.
The message is one: the Al-Shabaab has wasted your time, the Al-Shabaab has made your children don't go to school, the Al-Shabaab has made you fail to get treatment, the Al-Shabaab has made you fail to develop yourselves. AMISOM, in conjunction with the government of Somalia, is here to make all these things come, to make you be able to get humanitarian assistance, to make your children go to school, to make all your women get all the basic requirements that a human being loves.
Meanwhile, the United States have carried out a military operation against Al-Shabaab militants in Somalia, and the Pentagon is assessing the results of the operation before releasing details. Amina Hamid, Africa Today.
All right, Ahmed Abdi Godane became leader of the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab group in 2008 after a U.S. airstrike killed his predecessor, Aden Hashi Airo, in a remote village in Somalia. Now, and for the man who has a $7 million bounty on his head, it's not certain if he's dead or alive. Now, joining us on Africa Today, we have Olufemi Lawson, a political analyst here in Lagos, Nigeria. You're welcome to Africa Today.
It's a pleasure.
All right. And then on Skype, we have Marcus Hone of the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology and an expert on Somalia issues based in Germany. We'll have him as we get along. Now, the issue of extremists and terrorist activities seem to be escalating across the continent. Even though we're talking about Somalia today, but it seems there's some kind of similarities with what's going on in Somalia, in Nigeria, Mali, and so on. But what's your assessment? How is Africa faring generally? Why is this escalating at this time?
I think, thank you very much. The situation we have found ourselves today is no longer an African situation.
Okay.
It has become an issue of global terrorism, and we cannot isolate Africa. Neither can we isolate Nigeria, for instance, in our own situation, in the fight or in analyzing, the issue of terrorism. Because if you remember in 2012, Al-Shabaab as a group pledged, allegiance to, the Al-Qaeda network. And you find every other terrorist organizations, no matter how mushroom they have begun to pledge their allegiance, to the Al-Qaeda, who serves like a mother body of this organization. So it should no longer be seen as an African problem. It has become a global issue, and we have to start addressing it, globally. Today, we cannot isolate our situation as a country or as a continent in dealing with the issue of terrorism. So the issue of Al-Shabaab can no longer be treated as an issue of Africa, because there are international collaborations. We are fighting a network, that is globally entrenched.
All right, but do you see this as, would you say Africa has been overwhelmed totally by this terrorist escalation?
Sincerely, we are becoming overwhelmed, because when you talk about Africa, you look at the East, the Al-Shabaab has, of course, on several occasions left the territories of Somalia, had carried out attacks in other Eastern African countries. Now look at the situation of our own country, Nigeria. And when you talk about Africa, you are talking of Nigeria, which is the most populous. We are talking of an economy that has been said to be the largest in Africa. You are talking of a situation that has escalated into neighboring countries. We have heard of attacks in Cameroon, in Chad, in Niger, by this Boko Haram sect, who, of course, are operating from Nigeria. So we cannot really say that these issues can be, like I said earlier, we cannot begin to address it in isolation, and our own situation as a country, of course, can no longer be treated as a Nigerian problem.
Yeah, but let's talk about collaborations now. We've not really seen tangible efforts from different governments, even though you said it cannot be treated as an issue of one country as the case. But Africans or African heads of state have not really come together in tangible terms to handle these issues before.
Well, I think I understand that today the African head of states are meeting in Nairobi. But I think that is a step that is coming rather too late, because each countries in the past have treated these issues in isolation. We have seen a situation in the past where our neighboring countries saw Boko Haram as a Nigerian problem. Okay. At a point in time, African countries saw Al-Shabaab as a Somali problem. But today, the reality we are faced with is a situation where these organizations have become a network group. They work hand in hand. And today, we have a situation where our head of states are now being forced to come and sit together beyond what governments across the regions can do together. I also observed that there has not been collaboration between citizens and government in the various countries. Okay. There has not been collaboration even within security agencies. Okay. A situation, Nigeria, for an instance, we have a situation whereby we have a common enemy, but we have different, approaches at tackling it. So I think it's quite unfortunate.
All right, we'll come back to this. Now, joining us via Skype on Africa Today, we have Marcus Hone, an expert on Somalia issues based in Germany. Marcus, it's good to have you join us right now. Now, from your assessment...
Yeah, hello, Mike.
Yes, it's good to have you on right now. Now, how are Kenyans reacting to the rumors of Al-Shabaab leader Abdi Godane being hit by U.S. airstrikes? Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, if Ahmed Abdi Godane would have been killed in the strike, and so far we don't know yet if he has been really killed, but it's likely. So if he would have been killed in the strike, it would be really a strong blow against Al-Shabaab, I think, because what we could observe in recent years was that Ahmed Abdi Godane was actually monopolizing or trying to monopolize power within the group. So previously, until 2012, Al-Shabaab had, so to say, a shura, a council, which consisted of several, like 30 senior Al-Shabaab leaders, and Ahmed Abdi Godane was just one of them. And he had a couple of very senior partners in the movement who also took different positions than him sometimes on the issue of foreign fighters or the issue of suicide attacks or the issue of outreach of Al-Shabaab. But in early 2013, actually, if you remember, you could observe a purging campaign within Al-Shabaab, and Ahmed Abdi Godane and his Amniyat security forces, which were strongly loyal to him personally, they executed and hunted down a number of senior Al-Shabaab officials like Ibrahim Al-Afghani. They hunted also Mukhtar Robo, Hassan Dahir Awais, and also the famous foreign fighter Omar Al-Hamami. and some of them were killed, some of them went into hiding. And from June 2013 on, you can say Ahmed Abdi Godane was, so to say, the sole ruler or Amir of Al-Shabaab. So if he would have been killed right now, a few days ago, this would be really a serious blow to the movement, I guess.
All right, we often see the United States come to the rescue, so to say, sometimes, but it doesn't seem to take away, it doesn't seem to quell the threats and all of the works of terrorists generally. Why is it so?
That's a very good question, Mike, and I would like to comment also a little bit on the previous speaker and also on the video we saw on the Somali AMISOM, the AMISOM operation today against Al-Shabaab and what the Ugandan military commander said. I mean, I think it's not really time to celebrate any kind of deadly strike against Al-Shabaab. But if you think about African terrorism or terrorist movements in general, be they in Africa or somewhere else, they never build only on weapons. Even the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria today, I don't believe that this is only a bunch of 15,000 wild young people who are eager to chop off some heads of some so-called unbelievers or whatever. In order for such a movement, and now we can come back to Somalia, in order for such a movement to have a strong foot on the ground, to mobilize young people to join it, to conduct all these complicated operations they have been conducting in the last years, you need to have some amount of political legitimacy. Or you can also frame it the other way around. The alternative powers in the region, and now I'm speaking, for instance, of the Somali government, but I would also include the Nigerian government or the government of Iraq or Syria. The governments in place obviously do not perform satisfactorily, so that young people would rather join them instead of the terrorists. So to say it very simply, Al-Shabaab has a certain, or at least until recently, had a certain amount of legitimacy among a good number of Somali people. Yeah? And they had some convincing arguments against foreign forces, including the United States and of course Ethiopia and Kenya, who were more or less at will interfering into Somali politics and actually even militarily intervening in Somalia against the will of the majority of the population. So these were actually the drivers for Al-Shabaab, which brought them popular legitimacy and which also facilitated the operation inside even territories which were nominally controlled by AMISOM, including Mogadishu. So the reason for Al-Shabaab being able, until recently at least, to conduct complicated terror strikes in many locations in Somalia is that many people on the ground obviously still support the movement. Though this kind of so-called surgical strikes against the leadership don't solve the political problem regarding terrorism. Terrorism is a political problem and not a military problem.
All right. Marcus, we'll come back to this. Thank you very much. Now, in October 2013, Libyan terrorist Al-Libi was captured in Tripoli by U.S. forces in a pre-dawn raid. Now, with the fate of Al-Shabaab's Ahmed Abdi Godane unclear, many wonder who will be the next terror leader in Africa to be hit or captured. We'll go on a quick break, and Africa Today will be right back. Stay with us. All right, going back in time, Al-Shabaab was in control of Mogadishu in the southern region of Somalia between 2006 and 2011, after which the group was forced out of the capital by peacekeeping forces deployed by the African Union. Oh, now, we're still on this. Now, Marcos earlier, before we went on break, talked about the support sometime of people who still have some ideological sympathy and so on. Now, it is very clear that these terrorist groups, especially in Somalia, have not given the people the freedom to live the way they want, have access to social amenities and so on. But why would they still have support from the people?
Well, I think we must get it clear that one major instrument that these groups employ is, force. Okay. And, as a means of coercing the people into succumbing to their whims and caprices. So in a situation whereby ideology are preached with force, the people sometimes, no matter how sympathetic they are to the government or opposed to the government, really have no choice or really have no say in situations that we find ourselves. And he really said one thing which is practical. People have sympathies for these organizations at times because of the loss of confidence in the various governments across the continent. And we have a situation where, of course, till date in our own country, some people are still yet to agree that Boko Haram, like Al-Shabaab, is purely a political movement. Because, of course, it is built on the back of, of a religion ideology. But fundamental reality is that it's a political movement, and the primary thing that is being used, even before religion, to canvass, especially those young people. Al-Shabaab as a movement, for instance, the Arabic interpretation is, the young stars. It was a movement that started purely, from the minds of the young people. Okay. You understand? A splinter group that broke out from the ICU. So these same groups, like Boko Haram, employ, the instrument of talking to the mind of the young people who mostly, have lost confidence in the government. You understand? And by doing that, when you talk about an organization that can win the heart of the youth, then you are talking of an organization that has won the heart of the majority of that particular given society, So I think it is important, you understand, for us to begin to address those questions that are raised by the people, you understand, ordinarily, before they graduate, you understand, to issues that leads to armed struggles, like, that graduates to terrorism, like we have on our hands now. So I think it is important because it is inevitable. Even if people are unwilling to live under such conditions, the people have no choice because it is purely an armed struggle.
All right. Let's get to Marcus Honey in Germany. Now, Marcus, Somali authorities have asked members of Al-Shabaab to surrender within 48 days or face justice. Now, are they likely to surrender?
That's an interesting question. It's an interesting concept. I mean, how credible is it that Somalia, which is largely backed by the USA and UK and other Western powers, can really live up to this promise? I mean, if Al-Shabaab leaders are now surrendering, can they really be sure that they will not be persecuted or even executed? I doubt that, actually. So I think on the one hand, it's a clever move by the Somali government, and it's also something which hasn't happened before. So it's in a way a political innovation on the side of the Somali government, including its political backers in the West. I doubt that the leading figures or even medium-level political figures of Al-Shabaab will trust this offer. I can imagine that a couple of rank-and-file people might take the chance and leave the movement. And here I would like to also agree with my previous speaker who said that actually we have to address the political problems behind that. So I think just a 45 days announcement of, amnesty, I think this is also not enough to tackle the issue. So what the Somali government should do in order to back up this offer would be really a signal that it's ready to talk about the political problems behind the unrest in Somalia and behind, the disappointment of many people with the Somali government and its allies. And it's not only political problems of today. I mean, if you look at the history of Somalia in the last few years, which actually was the time when Al-Shabaab grew into a major political and military organization, it's a history of failure of foreign interventions. The United States, Ethiopia, and also other neighboring states only used force, either directly or indirectly, to tackle the Somali problem. They were paying warlords who had a horrible human rights record, who were notorious criminals. They were backed by the United States, they were backed by the Ethiopian government in order to do the dirty work in Somalia. And this gave actually the Islamists a legitimation for offering something alternative to the people. And this actually led into the formation and the success of Al-Shabaab. So what I will say is the Somali government and its allies have to seriously reconsider its program for Somalia. And this 45 days can only be a beginning. The Somali government should actually sit down and take the sovereignty of Somalia in its own hand and acknowledge that it made mistakes in the past and say that they want to sit down and talk with people about the political problems which have mainly been created by corrupt Somali politicians and by militaristic politics of the neighbors, and also by the very militaristic and unhelpful policies of the West.
All right, thank you very much, Marcus Honey, for joining us on Africa Today. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, now, what scenario can play out if at the end of 45 days, Al-Shabaab does not accept the, if I call it amnesty as the case may be, they don't accept the surrendering as the case may be, what kind of scenario?
I think if we are going to be realistic, I think the 45 days amnesty declaration, we must not begin to put, because of course we are still living in a situation of uncertainty as regards the death of Ahmed Godani. Exactly. No one is certain, not even the US is certain about his death. We should also be looking at a situation whereby this guy resurrects, in quote, tomorrow, you understand? But one gain that is dead may give to the disturbing taken by the Somali government is that, of course, as it stands today, there's no clear-cut, heir apparent to Godani. Unfortunately, he has not built any line of succession. And I think that may help in the drive by the government to really get those guys into negotiation and, of course, the offer of amnesty. And beyond the amnesty, the government must understand that being a political movement, you understand, they must begin to look beyond the option of granting amnesty, integrating them. Of course, there must be political integration, you understand, because tomorrow the insurgency may rise again, because when those questions that have led to, the insurgency in the first place are not addressed, and because a leader is dead and we think, we can coerce, we should not forget that there are external collaborators. There are people behind the scene who will keep telling them, no, you cannot. So there are people who, of course, will keep propelling them and are willing to fund them to sustain the movement. So we must begin to look beyond the option of the 45 days. I think it is not going to be enough to start a realistic reintegration.
Would you support a situation like a dialogue, sitting down on a round table with these people?
It has always been the best option if there's sincerity. I think we can begin to see some sense of sincerity on the part of the Somali government. And of course, we must, at the same time, before engaging in such dialogue, have some sense of willingness on the part of Al-Shabaab, you understand? And that can be done when, if Godani is dead, as being speculated, of course, there must be a clear-cut leadership that will, champion such positions on the part of Al-Shabaab, because the government cannot also coerce them into this amnesty offer. Okay. It must be something that must be willingly given by the militants themselves, but there must be leadership. And when there's no leadership, there are tendencies that there will be splinter groups again from the Al-Shabaab, and of course, the insurgency will continue.
All right, now, but from your general overview of how things are going, the trends generally, how close or maybe far away is the fight or to win the war against terrorism on the African continent?
I think we are not yet near any visible resolution to the conflicts we have found ourselves, because today, like I said, there's no clearly defined collaboration between regions, between countries, and even within countries. And that is the first step that must be taken. So as far as the continent is concerned, apart from instances where America have to move in to protect mostly their economic interest, there have not been a clear-cut defined, approach to tackling the problem of terrorism in Africa, which is quite unfortunate. I think the African head of states must sit down together and define, as an African Union, a collective approach towards tackling terrorism. And I think whatever strategy is going to be drawn must be built on collaboration from the citizens and our security agencies, which is what is not existing at present.
It's okay, but I'd like to know the specific role and practical and tangible roles citizens can play when they don't have access to guns or weapons to protect themselves in this kind of a scenario.
Well, I think like Marcus rightly said, we should understand the background of this situation. Right. Most times, these issues don't start from the point of arms. Okay. Of course, where we need to engage our citizens and how our citizens can collaborate starts from building the confidence in our people. Practically, the people have lost confidence in government in most states of Africa. Sometimes in Nigeria, we try to put the blame on the central government, but of course, we must begin to look from the top to the bottom, governments have not only failed at the top in Nigeria, governments have failed from the top to the bottom in Nigeria. In most instances, we may not even have to hold the federal government responsible for certain things. For instance, it is going to be illogical to hold the federal government responsible for the inability of children in Burma to go to primary schools. So we must begin to address it from the bottom to the top. But this approach most Nigerians have currently taken is the bottom to the top, from the top to the bottom. So we must take it from the bottom. And these issues have to be addressed from the point of taking government back to the people. We must begin to build confidence. Then citizens will begin to have confidence in government, and they can offer information. One of the problems that the war against insurgency in Nigeria, the terrorists live. In fact, if I watched the video of the intrusion of Goza, and I almost shed tears because I saw even residents jubilating at the entry, of the insurgents. This is a situation we have found ourselves, because imagine in such a local community that the people do not believe they have a government on their side. So the insurgents came and they were celebrated. Quite unfortunate. So the government must go back to the grassroots and build confidence in the people so that citizens can begin to offer useful information and give ideas. We have a lot of brilliant Nigerians who can give practical suggestions to the government. But this government, in most cases, have been far away from the people. And we cannot successfully win any war against insurgents without the people. It's not going to be won on the basis of the number of fighter jets we acquire or the number of arms and ammunition.
Olufemi Lawson, thank you very much for joining us on Africa Today.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. And we thank Marcus Hode for joining us from Germany earlier on. Now, looking at the trend with major terror groups in Africa and around the world, the death of a militia leader usually gives rise to a more ruthless successor. The African leaders are now exploring the possibility of a special fund to combat and end Islamist militant groups like Al-Shabaab and even Boko Haram in Nigeria. It is believed that terrorist organizations have grown in terms of number and capability, and no single state can tackle this threat alone. That's our show for today, and as always, we invite you to share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC Africa Today, or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. I am Mike Okwoche, and remember, this is Africa. Bye for now.